All right, so now it is live and recording. All right, if anybody hasn't that's here for Gail Dooley's class or any other class that has sent in sign-up sheets, we have them over there. Jessica's class, I think, also has a sign-up sheet. So make sure you sign that before you leave so you can get credit for attending. All right, well, we're going to get started. This is the first lecture of the semester. And to introduce our guest speaker, I introduce Dharma.
Hello, everybody. I'm in the graduate education program. I know I'm new this year, so you might not know. Joining us today for our talk is Dr. Ken Kiewra. He is from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Dr. Kiewra is actually a renowned researcher in the area of study skills and note-taking. He's authored a couple books, several books so far on the subject, and countless articles. So he's definitely a go-to guy when it comes to study skills and note-taking and so forth. So my goal for today is you guys to walk away with some great tools that you can put in your toolkit to study and do well this semester and beyond. So without further ado, Dr. Ken Kiewra.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dharma. Good. Thanks for the introduction. Good to see you again.
Yes.
Welcome, students. I can see who's paying attention. Yeah. We're going to shift over to the PowerPoint, and then we'll get started from there. Thanks. Are you all seeing it now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Go ahead and close that. Yeah. Okay. Let me start with a question, and that is, who has ever taught you how to learn? How to take notes, how to study them, how to memorize things, how to get motivated, how to manage time, perhaps how to analyze your errors. So go ahead and put your hands in the air if people have taught you to do those things. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands at all, so that tells me something.
There's a few.
What happens oftentimes in schools is that schools teach the products of learning, how to add mixed fractions, the First Amendment to the Constitution, but not the processes of learning, not how to learn. As a result, students often go through school all the way up into and through college without never really having learned how to learn. So if you have some trouble in school, if you have some doubts about how to learn, you're certainly not alone, because like most of us, people never really bothered to teach us how to learn. What I want to cover today is a method of study that I think is very simple. You'll learn it within 30 minutes, and it's something that I think you can use and apply right away. And I think that's good because a lot of times, of course, your teachers and your professors will tell you, go study this, go study that, but they really don't provide instruction on how to do that. So that's what today is about, is a good, powerful technique for how to study. All right. Have you ever had any really crummy teachers? I remember having one about 5th grade who was teaching us about the planets, and he just kind of threw out the information. He said, all right, here's information about the planets. Go out and learn it. Go out and study it. And I remember that I learned next to nothing that year about the planets. The one thing I do remember learning was the planet Uranus. And that's because I was in 5th grade and its name was Uranus. But other than that, I didn't learn too much. So sometimes in particular, we're faced with teachers who aren't all that effective. And it's really upon us. It's on our own shoulders as students to figure out how to learn this stuff. But there's a problem. The problem is that very often students, again, because they haven't been trained in how to learn, make some costly mistakes when it comes to learning. Here's 4 costly mistakes I want to talk about in a bit more detail in just a minute. Students often fail to select the important ideas, such as now when I'm talking to you or lecturing to you. And oftentimes students will record a sketchy, incomplete set of notes. Students often fail to organize information. If they do organize information, they tend to create lists and outlines, which, as you'll soon see, are not so effective. A third thing students tend to do is they fail to associate or relate information. Instead, they learn in a piecemeal fashion. And the fourth thing is that students often fail to regulate their learning, check, monitor their learning. Instead, they tend to use redundant strategies. So let's look a little more closely at each of these 4 problems before we look toward a solution. Okay, so the first problem I mentioned was that of sketchy notes. So imagine you had a lesson on the 8 planets, and your notes look something like this. Of course, you would have notes for each planet, but your notes are as incomplete as this. What would happen if you were to study these notes a couple weeks later in preparation for a test? Well, first off, there's a lot of missing information. There were probably 6 or 8 facts about each planet, and you only have a small handful of those. Secondly, even the notes you have aren't very descriptive. I would look at this weeks later and say, 36 million miles, what's that? Or 3,000 miles, what does that refer to? Rocky, what is that? Is that like Rocky 1, Rocky 3, Rocky 12? You remember Rocky 12, that's where Rocky hits Apollo Creed with his cane a few times. So, in other words, these notes are not going to be very useful later on when it comes time to study. A second problem that students often have is they make lists and outlines. And while these notes are better organized and certainly more complete, they're really not very good for comparing information. Imagine now that there's not 2 planets on your list or your outline, but there's 8. How are you going to make comparisons among those 8 planets? Information is going to be in a long line. It's going to be separated. It's going to be hard for you to see patterns or relationships. A third problem has to do with piecemeal learning. A lot of times, teachers encourage students, and students are satisfied with trying to learn one piece of information at a time. And I call this the flashcard approach. I'm sure your teachers have recommended that you make flashcards from time to time. So maybe on one flashcard it says Mercury's surface, and on the back it says Rocky. On another card, Jupiter's moons, 17. And what you do is you go through these flashcards one at a time, trying to memorize these individual bits of information. Not very effective. To give you an analogy, suppose that I dumped all the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle on the table in front of you. And I said, okay, what does this puzzle look like? What's the final product? Would you do this? Would you pick up one piece and say, oh, this one's kind of a green, jagged piece. Oh, here's another piece. This one's kind of brown and it has rounded edges. Oh, here's a green piece with some dots on it. That's crazy. By looking at each piece individually, you'll never understand what the final puzzle looks like. You've got to take those individual pieces and you've got to assemble them, put them together to create a coherent picture. And it's the same with learning. We can't be satisfied looking at individual pieces. We've got to put those pieces together. The final problem that students often have is that of redundant strategies. By that, I mean that students repeat information over and over. So they might want to learn the fact that Jupiter has 17 moons, and they start sounding like a broken record. Jupiter 17 moons, Jupiter 17 moons, Jupiter 17 moons, Jupiter 17 moons. They're trying to cram as well as they can, non-surgically, all that information into their brains. Okay, let me just move that over there. So, what do I think about redundant strategies like rehearsal, rereading, rewriting, reciting, recopying, regurgitating? Ridiculous. We want to stay away from those sorts of strategies. Let me give you a little example that demonstrates the problem with redundant strategies. Here's something I want you to work on right now at your seats. I want you to try to make a sketch of the Six of Hearts, the playing card, the Six of Hearts. And then I also want you, secondly, to tell which way George Washington is facing on the dollar bill, left, center, or right. Okay? Take a minute and see what you can do with those two items.
Anybody need paper? Yep. And if you guys are for Jessica's class or Gail's class, sign in over there.
Or Schneer's class.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me?
Me? Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, because of the way the PowerPoint's displayed, they can actually see the Six of Hearts and the dollar bill.
Ah, okay. That's why I was trying to move it. Okay.
Yeah, that kind of got ruined. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Well, cheating is also a good strategy. So yeah. So we won't belabor this then. But had you actually tried on your own, virtually nobody ever gets the Six of Hearts right, knowing which way the hearts go and how many hearts there are and where the sixes are positioned. And few people are able to understand which way or know which way George Washington is positioned on the dollar bill. What this shows is that even though you've been exposed to these things thousands upon thousands of times, that's not sufficient for getting you to learn it. And yet that's a big fallacy that students have. They feel if I come into exposure with something, if I look at a book, or if I attend a lecture, or if I even put a book under my pillow at night, maybe through osmosis, I'm going to get this information. Well, that's just not right. Being exposed to information simply isn't sufficient for learning. You might think, for example, that you know the Star-Spangled Banner, but if Dharma would have asked one of you to sing it out loud right now, I don't think it'd be very pretty, and not just because of the tone of the tune. I think it's because people really would not know a lot of the words if asked to speak them on their own. So exposure to information is insufficient for learning. Okay, so that's enough about the problems. Let's talk about the solution. I told you at the start that I'm going to give you a very simple and concise study method that you can start using today. And the method is easy to remember. It's called SOAR. This method will help you soar to success. And as you can see from this slide, it involves 4 subparts: select, organize, associate, and regulate. So let's take a look at each of these 4. If you look on the left, we see what ineffective learners do relative to each SOAR component. And this is what I just talked about. Ineffective learners take sketchy notes, they make lists and outlines, they use piecemeal learning and redundant strategies. Not good. Effective learners, on the other hand, they know how to soar to success. Rather than sketchy notes, they make complete notes. Rather than lists and outlines, they make a chart, perhaps, like the one you see here. Rather than piecemeal learning, they strive to learn relationships among ideas. And rather than use redundant strategies, they tend to self-test, to regulate their learning to make sure they know, to know they're ready for a test in advance of the test. So let's look at each of these SOAR strategies in a bit more detail. Okay, let's go back to the planet information you saw just a little while ago. Rather than an incomplete set of notes, now we have a complete set of notes. When you take notes, this is what you should strive to do, to have a complete set. But here's the problem. Students only record about 1/3 of important lecture ideas. How many of you wrote that down? Probably about 1/3 of you. Yeah, only about 1/3. You know how crazy that is? What if I asked you for your phone number, which is 10 digits long, you tell me the phone number, and I decide to take notes, but I only write down 3 of those 10 digits. Crazy. That makes no sense, and it also makes no sense for students to record just 1/3 of lecture information. Imagine trying to study for a test and you only have 1/3 of the important ideas at hand. Not good. The second thing you want to do, if you're going to soar to success, is organize the information. So now you're looking at a slide with all the information about the planets, but no longer in a linear format, but in a chart, what we call a matrix. And I want you to examine that now. Hopefully you can see it well enough. Because the purpose of having organized information is not that it just looks good, or looks cleaner, or looks better. The purpose of having organized information is to spot relationships. So I want you to look at this right now, and then I want you to tell me what relationships you're seeing. I'll give you about 30 seconds to take a look. All right. What relationships are you seeing in this planet's matrix? Go ahead and just call them out if you can.
Go ahead, call them out. You see them? You have to speak a little louder. Speak up.
The miles are going down.
The miles are going down.
Okay. Good.
What else? The inner planets are rocky,
Right.
and the outer planets are slushy.
Yeah.
What else? Months and years are going up.
Okay. Okay, here, this is good. Let me work with you a little bit here. If you look across the first row, this is how far the planets are from the sun. Is that number increasing as we go left to right?
Yes.
Yes, it is. And then revolution time around the sun, is that number increasing or decreasing?
Increasing.
Okay. So now, look what we've done. I'm going to make a statement. As planets appear further from the sun, their revolution time increases. So the further they are from the sun, the longer the revolution time. Got it? How many pieces of information were in that statement I just made? $16, right? 8 in each row. So with one statement, I summarized 16 pieces of information. Or, as planets go further from the sun, their orbit speed does what?
Decreases.
Decreases. That's another 16 pieces of information. Now, looking below that, inner planets are smaller than outer planets. Inner planets are rocky, whereas outer planets are slushy. Inner planets have fewer moons than outer planets, and they have longer rotation times. See, this is amazing because none of this information is fictitious, it's just real. And it's all filled with associations that we've not seen before. And do you know why we've not seen them before? Because we don't study planets this way. We study them one at a time in a piecemeal fashion. Let me tell you about Mercury. Now let me tell you about Venus. Now let me tell you about Earth. So when we can look across the information, as we can with this matrix, we can see relationships and patterns that we wouldn't see otherwise. And that's where the real learning takes place. So with SOAR, after we select, we organize, and then we associate, which is what we just did. And you see the associations listed there. There's another way to associate, and that is to link the information. Are you guys getting back here? Or am I just...
What's that?
I'm hearing a lot of feedback. Are you guys getting that?
Yeah, we're getting a little bit of feedback coming through.
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and mute our mic.
Okay. All right. Another way to associate is to go outside the material. For instance, if we're learning about the planets, we might learn that a 20-year-old Earthling, like yourselves, would be only 5 years old on Mercury and 40 years old on Mars. So this kind of association is helpful for learning as well. The last thing we do with SOAR is we regulate. Regulate means we check our understanding. We check to know whether or not we know the information. See, a lot of times students go into class on test day and they make a crucial error. They let the teacher be the first one to test them. Why would you? Why would you ever let the teacher be the first one to test you when you can regulate your own learning in advance? You can test yourself. You can go into that test having tested yourself thoroughly, knowing whether or not you know the information. So never let the instructor be the first to test you. Do it yourself. Regulate your learning. So you can ask yourself questions such as, how far is Mars from the sun? What's the diameter of Jupiter? And then even the more important relationship questions like, what is the relationship between revolution time and orbit speed? Or what is the relationship between diameter and surface? Okay? So we see there, again, the 4 components of SOAR. We need to select the important information, usually through good note-taking. We need to organize it in some sort of graphic way, perhaps with a chart, perhaps with an illustration. We need to try to find associations that help us really understand and remember the information. And then we want to regulate our learning. We want to check our understanding, our comprehension. Let's go through another example. Here's some information from the sciences. And we can see there's 4 terms there with definitions. And this is a common way that information comes at you in school, through terms and definitions. So take a look and please read those, each one quickly, and then let's talk about it. Okay. What you should probably notice right away is that there's three types of symbiosis: commensalism, mutualism, and parasitism. And you need to find there the key information to select. Well, looking at that, I think you can see that there's two organisms involved in each of those types, and different things happen to those organisms. Those organisms either benefit, are unaffected, or are actually harmed. So here's the information you might select. You can see the definition of symbiosis: two organisms in a nutritional relationship. And then you can see the relationship between the two organisms: benefited and unaffected for commensalism, both benefit for mutualism, and then a benefited and a harmed for parasitism. This is good. This is good. We've reduced this information to its crucial elements. We certainly want this information in our notes. But the problem here is simply having this information in our notes kind of in this form doesn't allow us to see the relationships among these three types of symbiosis. But what if we were to do this? Now, with this organizer, this matrix, I can see that there's three types of symbiosis. I can see that there's always two organisms involved. I can see that one of the organisms always benefits, and the other organism is either unaffected, benefited, or harmed. Beautiful. This is what I would rather study much more than that original set of terms and definitions. So these are the three associations that we just found, that we just mentioned. The last thing we want to do, of course, is we want to regulate our learning. We want to make sure we know before we walk into a test and somebody else tests us. So we would come up with questions such as these. I always say, look, if teachers can come up with questions, students can certainly come up with questions as well. So in what type or types is an organism harmed? In what type or types is an organism benefited? In what type or types is an organism unaffected? And then even this application question at the end: a tapeworm eats from the host and the host is weakened. What type is this? So we would make sure we can answer questions like this before the exam. Okay. I'm going to show you one more quick example and then give you a chance to practice and end with some questions. I don't know, maybe some of you have had psychology or educational psychology or will soon be taking these courses. If so, here's 4 terms and definitions that I guarantee you'll need to learn. And I bet you've heard of these: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. If I'm a student who has to study this information, I do not, and I repeat, I do not just read these definitions over and over: positive reinforcement, presentation of a stimulus following a behavior that increases that behavior, presentation of a stimulus following a behavior that increases that behavior. That's crazy. In fact, let me tell you how I would approach this information, and then we'll get down to the SOAR elements. If I looked at this, I'd say, oh my gosh, there's 2 kinds of reinforcement. So before I even read the definition, I know that these 2 things are alike. They have to be. They both involve reinforcement. I know that these 2 things are different. They have to be. One is positive, one is negative. So I'm going to look in the definition for how they're alike. And I notice, and I hope you do too, that they both increase behavior. So I've learned something important. I've learned that reinforcement works to increase behavior. Now, I see 2 types of punishment below that. I'm going to make a prediction. If reinforcement increases behavior, I'm going to predict that punishment decreases behavior. I take a look, and sure enough, that's the case. It does. Punishment always decreases behavior. Back up to reinforcement. Remember, I said they have to be alike, but they also have to be different. Now I want to find how they're different. And I find that positive reinforcement involves the presentation of a stimulus. Negative reinforcement involves the removal. That's how they're different. I'm going to predict that that's the same for positive and negative punishment. And sure enough, it is. Positive punishment, presentation. Negative punishment, removal. So you don't ever approach learning in a piecemeal fashion. Look for how things are alike. Look for how things are different. So back to the SOAR technique, what is it that I've actually done here is I've selected the important information. Positive and negative reinforcement increase behavior and either present or remove a stimulus. And positive punishment decreases the behavior and either presents or removes a stimulus. That's great, but it's hard to see all that when it's lined up this way. Let me see if I can create an organizer that shows all that more readily. And there it is. Looking here, I can see that whenever behavior increases, that's a reinforcement. Whenever behavior decreases, that's a punishment. Whenever a stimulus is presented, that's a positive technique. Whenever a stimulus is removed, that's a negative technique. Again, people, this is what I want to be studying for a test rather than that list of terms and definitions. Okay, so what is it that we gained from examining this organizer? Well, these associations that you've heard me make a few times already. I'll leave them there and let you take a look. With these sorts of associations, you have a true understanding of the information. And then finally, what is it we do? We regulate our learning. We test ourselves in advance of the test before the teacher tests us. So I might make questions such as, which technique involves an increase in behavior and the removal of a stimulus? Well, that's negative reinforcement. Which two techniques decrease behavior? Well, that's the two punishments. The teacher awards a gold star when Jamie raises his hand. This leads to greater hand-raising behavior. What technique did the teacher use? Positive reinforcement. We present the stimulus and the behavior increases. Okay. All right. Let me give you something to practice. And I see it's over there, so I don't know if this is going to help, but let me just kind of move it. Here's some information about rhinos. 6 facts about rhinos. What I would like you to do right now is take the next 4 or 5 minutes and see if you can select the important information, organize it, find some associations, and regulate your learning. Let me give you a few minutes to do that, and then we'll get back together and see what we've got.
All right, go ahead.
There might be paper after scrappy. Yeah. I have. You guys kind of sticks with the whole. What was the reason for the not being able to show up full screen? No.
I don't have
He wants to see that. Right. Right. So he wants to.
So when you click share screen, you have to click on the full screen that was created already to share that full screen. Because when you click it now, you click and share that, and then when you pull it up, it's actually creating a separate window. So then you'd have to repull it so that you can't see it because the screen is blocking. It's filling up the whole screen.
So that's probably going to happen for a series.
Yeah, if they have multiple, they might want to try slides.
That would work.
That might. It's the same product with these proposal. I've never had anybody try to do it or see
Like you saw,
Yeah.
going down the side. Yeah. But you think if they have two monitors,
Yeah, because then you'd be able to see. So you can blow it up and then you click share screen and select the phone image.
right.
But you can't do that when you only
When
have
you're
one.
lost, right, because it's already drawn up.
Right, and it's blocking everything, so you can't click
Yeah.
share.
I get it. But if he had a laptop with a monitor into it, that's essentially two screens.
Okay, I'm coming back on here. I know that probably wasn't quite enough time, but this is pretty typical where you have a list of information to learn, and we might, or you might try to learn it one piece at a time. But I hope you notice that these pieces fit together like the pieces of a puzzle. Let's take a look. After selecting out the key information, you could have created a table or a matrix that looks like this, that compares the black and the white rhino in terms of their habitat, their food, and their lips. So now we take that information and we can see it all at once with a glance, and we can start to look for relationships. Did you notice any relationships as you were doing this? Hopefully what you noticed is it makes sense that the black rhino, which lives in the jungle, eats twigs because twigs are available. It makes sense that the white rhino that lives in the plains eats grass because grass is available in the plains. So hopefully you noticed that. But what about these crazy lips? Well, it just so happens that the lips are related as well. If you're in the jungle and you're eating twigs, you would want lips that are hooked for grasping, picking up the twigs and eating them. You would want square lips, which are kind of like the bucket of a crane, which are perfect for scooping up grass on the plains. So you can see, just like the planets, information is not random. Information in this world makes sense. There's a rhyme and a reason to the information in this world. And you can see that animals in the jungle are eating twigs with hook lips. Animals in the plains are eating grass with square lips. So those are some of the important internal associations, internal meaning within the material being studied. But we can also go outside the material, externally, and make some associations. For instance, you might think about cows and how they're like white rhinos. Both live in grasslands, both eat grass, and both have square lips. Or you might think, well, jungles are dark, so it kind of makes sense that the black rhinos are in these darkened or black jungles. Plains are light, so it kind of makes sense that the white rhino is in the plains. Because very often, of course, an animal wants to be camouflaged, so it's not hunted, and of course, so it can hunt. Okay, well, that brings me to the end of my presentation. You got to see the kinds of things students do that are problematic. You got to see how SOAR could help. You got to see a variety of examples of SOAR. And so at this point, I'd like to see if there's any questions that anybody has or any comments people have regarding any of this material.
Questions? Go ahead and raise your hand if you have any.
And I can see you now.
Ken, you want to click on your camera so we can see you, or?
Yeah, if I knew how to switch over there, I would, but otherwise, I don't know that I can.
Yeah.
Good question.
What would you suggest for vocabulary words? Since you really can't do the chart for it.
Can you repeat?
What
Louder.
would you do for vocabulary words?
Yeah.
What would you do for vocabulary words?
Sure. Okay. There is a great strategy for vocabulary words called the keyword method. And it actually involves creating an organizer or a representation. Imagine, if you will, that you have the word trigo. So if you have a piece of paper, write the word trigo on the left side. You know what trigo means in Spanish? It means wheat. So make a line going from the left to the right and write the word wheat. So on the top of the paper, you have trigo on the left, wheat on the right, okay? Draw an arrow down from the word trigo. Can you think of a familiar English word that sounds like trigo?
Say it out loud.
Tree.
Tree. Okay, so write the word tree. So you've drawn an arrow down from trigo to tree. Now draw an arrow on an angle up from tree to wheat. Now you got to be thinking, well, wait a minute, this isn't easier. I've actually added information. But here's the last step. Now, if you were to create an image joining tree and wheat, the image could be of a wheat tree. So imagine a tree, instead of leaves coming off of it, maybe wheat is growing off of this tree. That image of a wheat tree now helps you remember that trigo means wheat. So that's a strategy for learning vocabulary. You can use that for learning foreign vocabulary. You can use that for learning things like tarsals. Which bone is the tarsal? Or carpal. Carpal is what? The wrist bone? Yeah. Okay. Carpal sounds like carpool. So now I'm going to, and it means the wrist bone. So now I'm going to imagine a bunch of kids in a carpool in the back of a car with handcuffs attached to one another's wrists. That image helps me remember that carpal means wrist bone. So this is a very effective technique for learning any kind of vocabulary, and it involves, using organizers, but just a little different kind of organizer than you've looked at here, because there are many different kinds of organizers. So good question.
Others? Yeah.
Okay, so with the charts we were making earlier, like with the white and black rhino, we put the white and black on the top, but we put the differences or the categories we used on the left. Can we reverse that and put like black and white on the left side of the chart?
Excellent question. You could do whatever you want that helps you to learn the information. The reason I don't do it that way is I have just a few general rules that I use. Topics, which are the things that you're comparing, go on top. Topics on top. The categories I put down the left side. And the reason for that, I wish I had a little more time and I wish I could show you some examples. But the reason for that is because those matrices for comparing information come from hierarchies or from sequences. And those hierarchies or sequences are the things that end up on top. So it's very natural to extend them down and create a matrix. So if let me just go back to a quick example here. Yeah, this one. Notice here's a hierarchy of symbiosis. So now the topics are on top. Because this hierarchy is just as it should be, just as it should appear, it makes it very easy just to put these categories here. So that's why I like to do it. There's nothing wrong with doing it the other way, but this is just a natural system for doing that. That's a good question. I think, you know, the real answer here is if an organizer works for you and it shows you the intended message very quickly, then you've got a good organizer. If it's not showing you the intended message very quickly, see if you can work with it some more.
Other questions?
Okay, I have a question. So you said that most of the time that we only take about a third of the information that we're supposed to actually be learning. So in that case, are bullet points not productive at all?
Well, no, a bullet point can certainly be productive. In fact, I would caution you not to take notes verbatim. That's not effective. The best way to take notes is paraphrase. Put them in your own words. Be succinct, but be complete enough so that if you were to read those notes a couple weeks from now, they would make sense to you. See, a lot of times people just write down a single word, arrhythmia. Okay, well, I didn't really write down the definition. I didn't write down what arrhythmia is. I didn't write down how it's related to heart problems. I didn't write down other kinds of heart problems. So, you know, so bullet points can be fine. They're a nice way of showing that some things are more superordinate and some things are more subordinate. But just make your notes complete enough so that you understand them now and a couple weeks from now. That's what I would recommend. And I guess I also want to say that students are actually pretty good at getting the very main ideas. Students get 80% of those, 90% of those sometimes, but it's in the details and the examples where students go astray. They're not writing down enough of the details and examples, and those are the things that really make those main ideas make sense. Good, thanks.
Anything else? Cool. All right, well, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate you talking with us today.
Yeah, well, thank you all there. I can see. Thank you, Morningside. I hope you know, this was a good way to kind of figure out your presentations and get some of the bugs out for subsequent ones. But from my side, things went great, and I was glad to do it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kiewra.
All right, we're going to go ahead and hang up. Thank you again, Ken, and you have a great day.
Okay, same to y'all.